We have a number of speakers on the Zoom call today to give an update on kind of where we are in Groton with businesses reopening and a business update. We will give kind of a brief overview on a number of topics. If people have questions as they're coming up, please use the comment section and put your questions in there. We'll try to work those into the comments and statements that we're making. And without any further ado, I will hand this over to the Mayor of the Town of Groton, Mayor Gretta.
Thank you, Mr. Reiner. Good morning, everybody. We're so happy that you're able to join Planning and Development staff and Latex Health District and the City of Groton for this webinar. We want you to know as a council that the council supports you and we want you to succeed in your businesses. We want you and your employees to be healthy, so please take precautions and take care of yourselves because we want you around for the long haul. We love our Groton businesses. And we look forward to the town being able to help you get through the phase 2 reopening process. It's coming up soon, and I know that means excitement, but it also means some challenges. So thank you again for joining everybody, and know that we're here for you in the town to help you get through. Thank you.
John, you were muted.
Mayor Hendrick, if you wanted to say a few words now.
Sure. Thank you, John. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And thanks for all that are attending this. I agree with what Mayor Granatowski said about it's a great thing that we can get our businesses back open and get us back to some sense of normal, although it'll be at a reduced capacity initially. We've already started with phase 1. And the city and town have worked together and worked with the businesses to get phase 1 businesses started. So now we will move on to phase 2, and we will continue to work with the businesses in order to get you back online and get customers back through your doors. So thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I think we're going to hand it over to Steve Mansfield now from the Latex Health District, and Steve's going to give an overview of what's happening in the region around the state. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, John. Good morning, everyone. Just a little background. The Latex Health District has been working with all of our member municipalities for going on 3 months now in our response to this pandemic. I think as we're moving toward phase 2, everybody is excited to get back to business and return to some semblance of normalcy. I do want to remind everyone we still have a pandemic. We still have a disease burden in our communities. So although we're relaxing, the sector rules are relaxing, we all have to remain diligent and adhere to social distancing and all the protocols that we're getting used to now. But that being said, I'm going to go right into the sector rules as they apply to some of the establishments. We regulate primarily food service. That's the biggest one. The sector rules and certification for reopening were issued this weekend. Both Katie and I reviewed all of them, although we are only responsible for focusing on certain entities per the governor's orders. We're going to review everything and, of course, be available to answer any questions. And if we can't get the answer, of course, we'll do the research and try to find out the answer. I will say the sector rules and certification for reopening, the guidance is pretty dense, but the good thing is the first half of most of the documents is the same. So it deals with the 50% capacity in most sectors, and then as you drill down to the different sectors, it provides more detail. So for instance, if you're a restaurant, if you go to the sector rules and go to the restaurant document, it will answer most of your questions. There are a few that are a bit confusing that we've already reached out to DECD and DPH to get some clarification on. So we're happy to do that if there are questions that we haven't thought of. John Reiner is going to be posting the phase 2 reopen rules by sector link at the end of this webinar, so anybody will be able to go to that and download the specifics. So jump right into indoor dining. The good news is there isn't a lot of new stuff in the indoor guiding document. Most of what applied to the first phase with outdoor dining still applies to phase 2, which is great. There's not a whole lot of new information to go over. But I will say, emphasize a few important things and then the things that have changed. As always, individuals over the age of 65 or with underlying health conditions should not visit these sectors regardless of the fact that they're reopening. They should continue to stay home and stay safe and protect themselves because, as I said, the virus burden still is in our community. So the primary change to restaurants is that establishments are now allowed to have people inside their restaurants. The indoor capacity can be up to 50% of the regular indoor seating capacity as determined by the state or local fire marshal. Outdoor dining is still encouraged as long as the restaurant doesn't exceed its regular operating capacity. So that's good. It's good for our restaurants. They're going to be able to get back to business, although not at full capacity. I think we'll see the majority of our restaurants reopen. It's probably a good time to mention Ledgelight Health District. My board of directors agreed with my recommendation to prorate our licensing fees for not only restaurants, but all of the establishments we regulate. So basically, we're going to be taking our yearly fee for those establishments and cutting it by 25%, assuming that 3 months people were either out of business or at a greatly reduced business. So we think that's only fair to do. We haven't done our yearly relicensure, which we usually do at the end of May, but we'll be doing that probably within the next month or so and at a prorated rate. So a few things about in the food service arena. Food service establishments are required now to log employees. The purpose behind logging employees is to maintain a log on premises over time to support contact tracing. So if we do have a disease outbreak in one of our communities and it's linked to a large gathering or a facility, if we're doing contact tracing and we determine, wow, everybody ate at a certain facility, we can go back to that facility and get a log of all the employees and then reach out to all those employees individually. A note about certification, just like in phase 1, all of these entities that are going to reopen in phase 2 are required to do the self-certification on the DECD website. If people have already done it for phase 1, there's no need to do it for phase 2. So if you have opened with outdoor dining during phase 1, you're good to go for phase 2. It's pretty self-explanatory. I did go to the DECD website and went through it myself, and pretty easy to answer their questions and get your certification. In addition to logging employees, capacity tracking, this is a very important part, and it's something that we lobbied pretty hard for. Employers are responsible for enforcing the revised capacity limits, which is important because, as everyone knows, enforcement of the governor's executive orders and the sector rules is incredibly difficult and time-consuming for the municipalities and Ledgelight Health District. So putting the responsibility on the owners for enforcing the revised capacity limits, I think is good. It gives them the control, and they have a certified food manager on staff to do that. So it will be essentially self-policing. Now, of course, if establishments have a hard time doing that and we get complaints, then of course we have to follow up per the governor's executive orders. But I think it's a good move that they made, recognizing the fact that Ledgelight Health District, we have more than 1,000 regulated establishments, and policing that, if you will, and making sure everyone is up to speed is really not an achievable goal. So I think that was really good. Probably a good time to mention that I, along with 5 of my other health directors across the state, basically petitioned the Department of Public Health and the governor's office for inclusion in the governor's reopening committee. Up until a couple of weeks ago, there was no representation from local public health departments at all. And someone was listening, and so we're now part of the subcommittee, and we have an ability to respond and comment to all of the sector rules and guidelines that come out. So we appreciate that, and I think it will help us as we move forward to the further reopening phases. Let's see, a couple other things about restaurants. All indoor waiting areas, now that people are going inside, have to be closed. So if there's a seating area where you're waiting for a table, that's going to be closed to promote social distancing. And social distancing markers have to be installed inside the facility to assure that people are remaining 6 feet apart. Buffets are not allowed, and self-service stations are not allowed. And that's across the board. And that, again, is to prevent cross-contamination and people coming in close contact with one another. Obviously, if we're trying to employ social distancing measures, the seating and table arrangements have to be rearranged to maintain at least 6 feet of empty space between customer groups. And if customer groups, they can seat them closer than 6 feet if they have some type of barrier, non-porous, say plexiglass or something like that, extended 30 inches above the table. And again, this is all clearly laid out in the sector guidance that John will be linking at the end of this presentation. A bit of a change. Originally, they said menus had to be on chalkboards or disposable. Now they're only encouraging no touch or disposable menus. They're still hoping people will do that, but if no touch or disposable options aren't practical to be utilized, businesses have to have menus that can be sanitized between uses. So plastic covered or something like that. Condiments, same as in phase one, they have to be single-use packets or containers. They can't be the kind that just sit on a tabletop. Maximum party size. This was quite a debate during our review of this process. And what it came out to be was, except as otherwise prohibited by the governor's executive orders, dining groups are permitted to exceed the capacity, what was previously in place, as long as they can comply with all the social distancing requirements and so forth. So larger gatherings are allowed now in restaurants, and it doesn't have to be limited to family members or immediate household contacts rather. Another interesting thing, bars can't be open, although the bar area can be utilized for seating. So the way the language reads is that bar seating is permitted, provided that there are no active work areas or staff working behind the bar. Now there's a caveat to that. If there is a plexiglass barrier, then that is allowable. The whole idea is they want to allow places that may have limited seating to seat people in the bar areas for the consumption of food, but they don't want to encourage people gathering at the bars. And people who are sitting at the bars have to be seated, so there'll be no standing around the bars. So essentially, the bars are closed for alcohol distribution and consumption at the bar, but available for seating. Another interesting one that came up about performers, they're exempt from wearing masks. All the other the people in the restaurant, both the staff and the attendees have to wear masks, except of course when they're eating. But performers are exempt from wearing masks when they're performing, but they do have to remain at least 12 feet away from the nearest person, including other performers. And the difference between the 6 feet that applies to everyone else and 12 feet for performers is essentially because of the fact that a lot of them are singing. And when you're singing, you're much more likely to be expelling any virus that you may have. So it's logical, and I don't think it's going to be much of an issue. But again, enforcement is the responsibility of the entity that is running the establishment. One more point, the latex-free gloves, like nitrile gloves, are required for table servers and must be replaced frequently, including after handling dishes and so forth. We actually lobbied against this provision because gloves can instill a false sense of security with any type of restaurant worker. And also, it's difficult to maintain sanitary conditions when you're wearing gloves unless you're changing them very frequently after pretty much everything you do. And then you're supposed to wash your hands between glove use. So I don't think it's practical, and my public health colleagues and I, again, lobbied hard against that provision and wanted to instead encourage hand washing, which is emphasized in 1913 B42 of the Connecticut Public Health Code, as well as the FDA Food Code. but we were overruled. So the rule is what the rule is. If you're at a restaurant, people should be wearing gloves, and that's what you should see. That's primarily it for the changes to the food service. As everyone knows, we're responsible for regulating a lot of the personal services, cosmetology, and so forth, barbershops. There aren't a lot of changes to that. The 50% capacity is still in place, and the restrictions or recommendations that people who are immunocompromised or older still do not attend. But the detailed guidance hasn't changed much from phase 1 to phase 2. Because people are inside now, they're emphasizing the fact that areas where people congregate, just like in food service, shouldn't be allowed, and non-essential amenities such as magazines, pamphlets, and so forth should be removed to prevent that contamination. And as I said, waiting rooms, lobbies, and so forth have to be closed, and people are going to have to wait outside, and they're encouraging appointments. And that's pretty much all the changes for personal services. I would encourage everyone who falls into one of these groups, one of these sectors that's going to reopen, to follow the link that John will provide at the end of this webinar, and review the document as it applies to you. And if you have any questions, feel free to call us or town staff to ask about the specifics around the sector guidelines. And I think that's pretty much all I have.
Thank you, Steve. At this point, I'd like to hand things over to Paige Bronk, our Economic and Community Development Manager, to say a few words.
Good morning. Thank you. Just as a refresher, this is the second of our series of Zoom meetings. The first one we held was May 12th. Also, I'm not sure we emphasized it. I think a lot of people know, but the reopening has been moved up to Wednesday, June 17th. Initially, it was June 20th, but a week from Wednesday is the reopening date. And then referencing the guidance by sector, that is now on the Explore More Groton website. If people go to that website, there's a pull down for business assistance. And within that is a COVID-19 resource tab. We've been trying to tally all of the significant guidance all along. And as Steve mentioned, John mentioned, we are trying to post that latest guidance, and you will find it online as we're speaking now. I think one other point I wanted to mention, we've been trying to get ahead. Obviously, we're reacting to this issue, and we're trying to get ahead and be proactive. We've done a survey, which we talked about in the last Zoom, but lately we've been focused on trying to get an understanding of where businesses are today and compare that to pre-COVID. And rather than guessing, we've actually been using a firm, they just started working with us, called Nava Retail. And they'll be doing a series of 4 different surveys, 4 stages. So basically they're doing stage 1 today. If you receive a call from Nava Retail, either Carly David or Casey Kidd, I just want to let you know that we are partnering, the town of Groton is partnering with Nava Retail on your behalf to get a statistically valid survey done so we can understand where businesses are at. There'll be a second phase interview and survey that is done over the summer. Third phase will occur in the fall, and the last 4th phase will occur post-holidays. So again, what we're trying to do is trend this and understand issues so that we can try to better understand the problems and maybe try to provide some assistance. Also, we'll compare that data to pre-COVID. I think it's important, rather than always just reacting and trying to guess as to where we're at, and having some of that statistical information. So again, Nava Retail, if you receive a call, please know that they are in partnership with the town of Groton. The last point I would make, we are being proactive as well in trying to provide additional resources. On June 15th, we'll have a separate Zoom call open to businesses. It's not a part of this series per se, but we are working with Miranda Creative, a marketing firm specializing in social media out of Norwich. And Miranda is working with us to offer a free seminar to businesses. Again, we realize people do not have a lot of time. They do not have resources to do something extreme, but we're hoping to give some quick tips, maybe a little bit of suggestion on how a business might pivot and get an advantage in light of the challenges that they have with their staffing and also loss of income. That's all I have at this point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paige. Deb Jones, the Assistant Director of the Office of Planning and Development Services, was also just going to give a very brief update on some things also. Thanks, Deb.
Thanks, John. So we have been busy processing the temporary zoning permits for the outdoor patios. So far, we've had 13. The turnaround time has generally been 1 to 2 days. And a number of them are up and running. I can see in the chat there's some questions about how the capacity of the outdoor patios impact the capacity of the inside seating once it opens up. And I think probably Steve Mansfield can address that later on. But at any rate, if anyone else is thinking about just opening a patio during this time while the executive order is in place, we have a pretty quick process. It's all the application forms are up on the website. The approvals are good until mid-September when the executive order allowing this expires. If that is not extended and the weather is good, the Planning and Zoning Commission has the ability to fast track a regulation amendment to allow these outdoor patios to continue through the good weather. And I think we'll take advantage of that if it comes to that. And I think Carlton probably has something from the city, right?
Yes, this is Carlton, and we've turned over 4 restaurants that wanted to get outdoor seating very quickly, some days right the same day of, and I don't have much more to say. There's a silver lining is that I talked to a restaurant person yesterday who said that they did learn a lot about their menu and how much they could probably take away from their menu because they now know more about what people have been ordering. So somehow there was a silver lining inside some of this too.
All right, thank you, Carlton. I know that there are a few questions that have been posted in the chat. So if attendees have any questions, again, please post them up there and we'll kind of jump around a little bit on who is going to answer those questions. I think, Steve Mansfield, did you want to answer one of those questions initially? And you're still muted, Steve.
Actually, Katie's going to take the first one.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so getting ready to open a patio. I'm worried that it will be taken away or my use of it severely limited as soon as I finish building it. How does patio capacity affect indoor capacity? So the rules that were established say that the indoor capacity shall be 50% of what your typical indoor capacity is, and that the outdoor dining will not affect that as long as the restaurant doesn't exceed its total capacity for indoor and outdoor. Also in the rules, if you were given additional seating from the municipality, that will not be affected from phase 1 to phase 2.
And I'll just chime in a little bit there. I have spoken to a couple of our fire officials and they have indicated that there are capacity limits for both indoors and outdoors. So if you're concerned about what those capacities are, I'd reach out directly to your local fire marshal and hopefully they'll be able to give you that information.
Well, this is Keith Hedrick. Let me ask you this. Some of the outdoor establishments have built some temporary structures. And my understanding is that in the middle of September, once the executive orders expire, then those will have to go away because they were authorized quickly and didn't go through all the full permitting process. Is that accurate or is that inaccurate?
I'll just say that's not under the jurisdiction of Ledgelight Health District. We don't have any opinion on whether they can stay open or closed, not in our regulations.
But
Carlton may be able to.
I can answer that. That is accurate, Keith. If you want to allow your restaurants to continue using the outdoor patios, and frankly, I can see why all of us might, it's really created a lively streetscape out there. There is a fast track way of amending your zoning regulations to allow it.
Let's see. So I think that covered the majority. I think a lot of our questions initially dealt with the outdoor space as well as for outdoor events. Is there a size limit for phase 2, or is it just dictated by the ability to social distance?
Yeah, that is correct. There is no limitation on outdoor capacity being 50%, as long as the parameters that Katie set forth are answered. You're not exceeding your total capacity for indoor and outdoor.
Okay.
And the last question, somebody said, hi, oh, Nancy Kauser. Hi, Nancy. For outdoor events, is there a size limit for phase 2, or is it just dictated by the ability to social distance? That's a really good question. It varies from sector to sector. Generally, I believe the most recent guidance is, off the top of my head, I believe it's no more than 150 at outdoor events. But there are different types of outdoor events. There are limitations, for instance, on graduation ceremonies that are different from, say, at an amusement park. They say there's a 50%, I believe, for amusement parks. Again, not something we regulate, but I believe in my reading it said there's a 50% occupancy. But at some amusement parks, that could be thousands of people. So at a graduation ceremony, I know you're limited to 150 people as of early July, I think, is when you can do that. But at an amusement park, it's a much bigger number because it's 50% of the capacity. So it isn't very clear, but if there's a specific discipline that you're interested in finding out about, let me know. Another good example is the fact that indoor and outdoor sporting events, basically outdoor sporting events do not have a specific limitation. So if you go to a baseball field, they're not going to put a cap on that. That was surprising to us. It was the first time we heard it when the sector rules came out. But if there's an indoor sporting event, although there isn't a specific number, they want to limit it to only a certain number of household members. So that language is a bit confusing. We have a few questions into DECD to get clarification on that, but feel free to, Nancy, reach out to me directly, and if you give me the specific situation, I'll get you the numbers.
Thanks, Steve. I know Paige had a comment he wanted to make.
I actually have two questions. I think, Steve, maybe you could provide a little bit of guidance on it. So the first question, most of these restaurants would know what their occupancy limit is, but let's just say that there are a few that are really unsure. What is the best and easiest way for them to determine that and get that accurate number so that the 50% can be calculated? You're muted, Steve.
I spoke to a couple of our fire marshals, and they said it will vary from municipality to municipality. So, for instance, if the Green Marble Coffee House opened, decades and decades ago, some capacity limit was established, and it may be in the file, and apparently it should be posted at the facility, but generally that's not something that's enforced. And again, this isn't my arena, but this is the feedback I've gotten. So if they're trying to determine a capacity, the first thing they should do is reach out to their fire marshal to see if that information is readily available. I don't know, Carlton, do you have anything to add to that? Are you familiar with capacity?
That's exactly right. The fire marshal has those calls. You'll find them in all the city buildings and restaurants on there, and we can judge it from there.
Second question I have definitely deals with you, Steve. So the sector guidance does make reference to keeping a contact list for some of the sectors. interesting. I didn't see in the guidance for restaurants that it explicitly states that. Can you give an opinion on whether or not that's something the state is requiring?
They did. I'm sorry, just had to make sure I wasn't muted again. I know there are specific requirements for logs for employees, but I think I agree with you. It was silent on whether or not tracking needed to be done for patrons. I didn't see that at all. Only that the people who work there have to maintain that log, which I agree. I think I see what you're getting at. I mean, it makes sense to know where all the employees are on premises over time, so you can contact trace. But what about all the people who may be in that facility? Probably a good time to mention that when we're talking about exposure and COVID-19 exposure, we're talking about close contact. And close contact is defined by being closer than 6 feet for greater than 15 minutes. So if you have two chefs working in a facility, in a kitchen, I think it would be likely to say that over an 8-hour shift, they would be in close contact for, closer than 6 feet. Even if you're wearing masks, that would likely be determined to be an exposure during our contact tracing. If there's a table of 6, and let's just say the waiter is diagnosed with COVID-19, that wouldn't be an exposure because they don't have that sustained contact closer than 6 feet for a significant amount of time. I'm guessing that's why they decided they didn't need to track. We do have the ability in the public health department, if we do think there's a significant exposure, and we've had 2 of these, I think, during the outbreak, where we know someone is infected, and we know that they've been at a public event and come in contact with certain people. So we do reach out specifically to people who may have been exposed. And I think if we had a situation at a restaurant where there was 1 or more positive employees, there would be a mechanism for finding out who ate there. We frequently do that when we're doing our foodborne illness investigations. We try to find out, for instance, if someone has a foodborne illness, who did they eat with? What did they eat? That's part of our epidemiological investigation. So there are ways to contact those people through credit card receipts and so forth. Rarely we will go public and say, if you ate at such and such a restaurant, you need to contact us. Or in another scenario, if you came in contact with kittens on River Road, you may have been exposed to rabies, you need to contact us. So, standard public health epidemiological practices do fall into place during this as well. But it's a good question.
Hey, thanks, Steve. I did see that there was a handout from a participant, actually from a council member, from Council Member Bordelon. Did you still have your question? I'll try to unmute you. Otherwise, if you want to just put something in the chat. I'm not seeing the hand anymore. Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. So some of my questions got answered. I was looking at the capacity, just using one restaurant as an example, say like Pizzetta's in Mystic, where they extended their outdoor seating. It would just make sense to me that depending on what the fire code capacity is, that these restaurants are granted the space available to use that, so that because when you increase to a 50% capacity, it's still a very low number, and if the outdoor section is included. So I did hear some of the comments saying there's a possible way to get an extension on that, and I think that would be extremely helpful, because looking at it and from what we talk about and what's out there, sitting outside is the most safest than being indoors. And so having that expansive outdoor seating area, if a restaurant can, and it's already been approved, extending that through the warm months, I think is awesome idea. Also looking at it as well, I know on the 17th, some restaurants, once they do decide to open up inside, But currently, like in downtown Mystic, there are a few that aren't allowing restrooms to be used on the indoor side of their building. And so the public restroom on our side of town in Mystic is being utilized, I would say, pretty heavily, even with it being tourist season. And there is only one soap dispenser in that. I can speak from the women's room. And it has been noted that it is running out at times. And I did reach out to John, and I appreciate his comments about how it is being cleaned twice a day and filled. But maybe we can add an additional soap dispenser in there, just really as we look at, increasing capacity and more visitors in the area, just making sure that that lavatory has an extra soap container. So if the company's coming in and filling it twice, well, then they're filling now 2 soap dispensers. So just one of my thoughts that I, from just being down and being immersed in the community, just some of the suggestions I think would be helpful. Thank you.
Just one comment on that, and thank you. There is no restriction during phase 1 or phase 2 in restaurants of employees or patrons not being able to use the restaurant. So if a restaurant downtown Mystic is not allowing, if they're just doing outdoor dining and they're not allowing patrons to use the restaurant, that's their own decision. It's not under the executive orders or the Connecticut Public Health Code. As restaurants begin to reopen, there isn't actually, and Katie, correct me if I'm wrong here, there isn't a provision in 1913b-42 that requires restrooms separated by sex, but I believe it refers to the state of Connecticut building code. And the building code does require for new construction. Is that right, Katie?
Yes, and I believe it's also in the state building code that if you're going to provide seating for dining, you have to provide restrooms. We received that clarification from the food protection program. So they should not be denying the patrons access to their indoor restrooms if they're providing seating.
And if anyone's aware of that happening, and I understand why they may not want that to happen, but it is in conflict with the Connecticut Public Health Code and the FDA Food Code, and the provision of bathrooms is not restricted by the governor's executive order. So that's something that should be referred to us, and we can just instruct the establishments on what the law is.
All right. Thanks, Steve and Katie, on that. So again, bathrooms should not be restricted. I know there was a question on that. Not sure if the police chief, LJ, had any comments that he wanted to make. I know, thanks for jumping on the call. Not sure if there's anything from your end that you wanted to bring up.
No, we have gotten some complaints, just as you might expect, for some things in downtown Mystic. We've been able to address all of them pretty easily, that, with social distancing, masks, that sort of stuff. We have also gotten some at some of our other retail establishments where some concerned citizens have called about some of the businesses where there's an increase in people, some that opened up last week. Again, those are items that we've been able to address. We haven't seen anything that's been outside the scope of what's been in the executive orders. So we have yet to take any action on any of those, any action in the form of issuing any summonses or things like that. But, our position has been to enable businesses to open, to create that atmosphere that we can, that helps them get their businesses open, whether it's just, putting additional seating outside as they've done. But we're trying to accommodate everyone that we can, and from the law enforcement and public safety perspective. So I'd be happy to address any questions, but I think most of the stuff that I've seen so far hasn't really been about public safety or police. So having said that, unless you have something directly that needs to be addressed from our perspective, I wouldn't offer anything else.
No, thank you very much, Chief. If any other members of the public that are attending this via Zoom, if you had any other questions that you wanted to post up, certainly happy to answer those. Otherwise, we'll give you another 30 seconds to post up those burning questions you had. Otherwise, we're going to start wrapping up this call. And I do appreciate everybody jumping on this call this morning, staff, town manager, both the mayors. I know there's some council members on the call. So let's see, going once, going twice. I'm not seeing any other questions popping up. So just some closing remarks from the mayor of the town, Mayor Granatowski. I'm not sure if there's anything you wanted to say in closing.
I just want to thank staff, and particularly I would like to thank Ledgelight Health District, Mr. Mansfield, the chief, and the city of Groton, mayor, and planning department as well, for being there for our businesses. And it's very important that we get everybody back on track, but again, do it in a safe, healthy way, because we want you business owners and your employees to be safe. So please feel free to reach out to town staff if you need anything, and know that you have allies in town government. Thank you so much for hosting this and for inviting me.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you very much, everybody. Thanks again, Steve Mansfield and Katie, for jumping on and doing a lot of great work on this. So no other questions popped up. So any businesses have questions, send them our way. And we appreciate your time and jumping on today. Take care and have a great day.